Welcome to our Going Green podcast. Today we're going to have a look at the race to an electric car. Now, in the UK, we're basically getting some choices now coming up. Petrol cars, diesel cars are fast disappearing. They won't be manufactured soon, and Paul will give me some details about that. So we've got a choice now. Do I buy an electric car or do I buy a hybrid? And if I'm going to go for an electric car, do I buy an electric car? Because of, well, I can see lots of problems here.
Well, yeah, there's some problems, but they're not major ones. You got to talk about, the major issues currently is the fact that I say it's cost, but that's not the major problem of the electric cars, because of course, as more people buy electric cars, the cost of the electric car will go down. And so then more people will have electric cars, therefore, yeah. And essentially the technology of the electric car is improving at a rapid pace. And so we're now seeing this slowly uptake of the electric car. It is estimated sort of by next year, the electric battery will be the electricity required to charge electric battery for your electric car will be on par with the current cost of petrol. Now, there are two caveats with that.
Petrol's going up.
Petrol's going up, but of course the caveat was actually made in earlier January of this year. So it's on January prices, which were already high for petrol, and now the cost of petrol is now soared above that. We are now getting to, the likelihood of that cost of the amount of electricity cost to charge the electric car suddenly, not even by the end of, by next year, 2023, it might be by the end of this year that they are now equivocal, so that it suddenly, you don't have to worry about the pain of trying to fill up your car with power or electricity or with petrol.
Well, I can see there's some good points. I've got solar panels, so if I buy an electric car and I charge it and it's a nice sunny day, I'm effectively going to charge this car for free. So I will have actually free sort of mileage on there. So, if I'm going to charge it from the grid or I'm going to charge it as I go around because I go and visit someone, then obviously I will have to use a charging point and I will pay for that. But if I can charge it at home and I charge it at the right time, which is sort of during the daytime when it's sunny, all right, in the UK occasionally.
Caveat sunny, yes.
If it's sunny, we've got a nice sunny day today, haven't we? I believe there is sun above the clouds.
Yes, there is some somewhere.
Somewhere, yeah. But basically, we've got this idea that I could fill the car up and run it for nothing. And I've got a friend that's got a car. He's got lots of solar panels on his roof, and that's what he says he does. He can manage to run his car off the solar panels, so therefore it's not costing him anything to drive it around.
Which is always that's a good thing, because it's one of those things where the benefit of running the electric car is then you're not producing CO2 emissions, and that one of the major points that the whole world economy is trying to do is to get all these CO2 emissions down, and one of the major things is, of course, the amount of cars on the road, or the amount of petrol cars and petrol diesel cars on the road who are causing the emissions. And so if you move away the electrics, you're suddenly not producing all this carbon, and suddenly everything is looking down, and we're starting to make a dent into the climate.
So I would agree that running costs of EVs is going to be cheaper, especially if you can actually charge off the grid, not off the grid, but locally using sort of whatever you've got, solar panels, wind power, or whatever. And you can actually buy your electricity off the grid anyway, like that. So that's good. Big problem I've got is the purchase price. And I know you say it's going to come down, but at the moment, it's still very high.
Yeah, I know, and the reason it's very high is purely because it's the cost of mining and extracting the lithium for the batteries. The batteries, making the car is relatively cheap, but the battery itself is the expensive part. And the problem you're finding is that to get enough range requires enough batteries, which then, of course, has the issue of a car with a decent enough range. We're it's suddenly a lot of batteries, which of course costs a lot of money. So it's one of these infinite cycles and problems. Is the fact that
Yeah. And there are any second-hand cars, really, so to speak. There are not many. It's quite popular at the moment to lease some of these electric vehicles, and quite a few of the cars you'll see on the road are actually leased cars. And if I was going to lease a car, then I would certainly think, well, if I'm leasing a car, I've got a choice of leasing either a petrol, diesel, hybrid, or electric. For what I use a car for, an electric would be ideal. If I want to go out and spend my hard-earned money trying to buy a car, then it's more expensive. And can I justify that? Because I have to justify not just the running costs of a car, I have to justify the buying cost and the running cost of a car.
yes, and those discussions still take place, but the same discussions take place with a normal petrol car as well.
Absolutely.
So you say you've got to think about things. Suddenly, you just got to change what you have to think of. So,
Okay, so my next problem then is I've bought my car. How about the range?
well, as I said, the bigger the range, it requires the bigger battery, and that requires two things: a longer charging time. So obviously that's a pain because obviously, you can't go anywhere when you're on the full charge because the charge determines your range as well. But your maximum range is given by the total capacity of the battery. But the other point, of course, is the fact that you want bigger range, you need more battery, therefore batteries cost more, therefore it's expensive to do long range.
But charging cars is actually getting better. It's getting quicker. Regardless of the car, we are now finding charging times are taking less time. You're not going into a charging point and waiting 2 hours.
No.
My friend Tim, who's got a nice electric car, he's got a lovely MG, he's taken me out for a nice ride in it. Hi, Tim. And he drives his car to Wales. He's got a dog, he's lucky. So he drives there, he gets so far, he charges the car and takes the dog for a walk. It's nice. The dog likes going out for walks like that. It's good. But if I'm trying to run this in a business, do I want to wait a long time to charge my car? The record at the moment for charging a car is the Fiat 500, and that charges in 24 minutes.
Oh.
Unfortunately, that only gives you a range of 81 miles because it's a Fiat 500. But then the Fiat 500, I would have thought if I've got a Fiat 500, I'm not using it for long journeys. It's a small little car. It's going to have town use. And for that purpose, it's going to be great because if I'm just bopping around town, then 80 miles is quite a lot of journeys in and around town for me in one day.
Exactly. And the critical point, which is what most people don't believe, is that if you want to travel long distance, there are other better ways to travel long distance. And then you might say, yeah, but would you take an electric car on holiday, or would you get to your holiday destination and then rent an electric car? And suddenly you sort of, the idea that having this little car for pootling around is great, and that's fine. And then you just basically rent which is what happens for holiday makers all over the world currently. They just rent these cars for, the week they are going to be there. And,
Yeah. Now, see, that also comes down to sort of what type of electric car do you buy? Do you want an SUV? Do you want a small little sort of round town little shopping car? Do you want a big 7-seater EV to sort of do something? Do you want your sports car? That could be good fun. They really do accelerate. Unlike petrol-driven cars, they have torque at low end, and they are spectacular. Sort of driving some of those, and they're good. I like it. And if I want to tow a caravan, then I can buy an electric vehicle that will and is able to sort of quite happily tow a caravan. Power is not the problem. It's typically range. But it's, if I'm taking my sort of caravan out, then maybe I can actually manage that range to drive my caravan, and then I can sort of charge the car when I'm at the caravan site, assuming it's going to have a charging point. But I would imagine that's the sort of place where you're going to start to find them.
Yes, and the major problem people complain about are these charging sites, and they're slowly getting there. The major problem is for them is the fact that it needs to be, you're not that you need space, but you need the infrastructure to build a charging site, because obviously, a car park technically doesn't need that much power, and then suddenly, but a charging site does. So it's one of those complex things, a sort of, you now need to put power where you didn't need power, but of course, where does the power come from? And so, it's a major problem, but they are coming more along online. I know there's loads of places that say sort of, come down to our electric charging point, celebration. But they are slowly coming down. In Hemel Hempstead, we've got 3.
Yeah.
We've got 3 dual charging spots, as in 2 car parking spaces for them.
And when I've passed those, so far, I've never seen them full with cars.
Yes.
So it means if I want to actually, my electric car did need charging, I could actually go in. I haven't yet seen a sort of a queue there for those. Unlike a petrol station, when you sort of try and drive in and you think, oh dear, look, there's a queue of 20 cars trying to go in here.
Yeah. So, it's one of those things where the uptake is slowly, but that's one of those things. Is because they are expensive at the minute, because so that limited amount of people are taking, those who can afford can take it up. But eventually, and then I'm talking in the next 4, 5, 10 years, eventually the price would become lower enough, with the range being, I say high, because it's always the fight against it, to a point where most people, the economics will land in favor of the electric car. And so we can actually then afford to actually use them, have them, and the charging points will be grown to establish the amount of cars in the zone, and everything will be hunky dory. We're getting there. It takes time.
Yeah. Well, electric cars are certainly booming, aren't they? We're seeing now more sales of electric cars than sort of,
diesel or petrol ones.
well, definitely diesel.
Yeah.
I was looking at the figures here. In 2021, they managed to sell 190,727 cars, which was a few more than they sold the previous year, which was 108,205. So there is an increase in the number of cars, but it's still not such a good idea in the UK. In the UK, it's still more expensive to buy an electric car than in other countries. And there is a sort of a government grant, I know, that helps But when they sort of decide that if you buy a cheap car, which is one under £32,000, which I think is quite expensive anyway, I don't think I've ever bought a car that expensive. Well, I know I haven't. 5,000 is nearer my mark. But back to the point. If the car is £32,000 or less, then you only get £1,500 government grant for doing it, to try and make sure that you do it. Trying to get people off of petrol cars and diesel. And other countries are doing better. Sweden, for instance.
Yeah, Sweden, Netherlands. I know Italy is up there heavily in the list for the amount of cars. But this is where they're doing this. They're prioritizing these things, and suddenly, it's working. These incentives are working. It just depends on which country incentives are better and how much push they are trying to do these changes. So it's different in every place, but there are major government pushes to do these things because, of course, it results in their climate emissions targets, and they can then say, "Look, we've got all these electric cars, we've reduced our emissions down," because obviously there are not many. Yeah, but the other critical thing, of course, is all the pollution in the streets. You see, where you have bad pollution, if you put electric cars, they don't pollute, and suddenly you go from raise your air quality. So, it's another major thing in sort of metropolitan areas to actually go for electric cars for two reasons. Firstly, it's the sort of not going that fast, not going that far. Electric cars are perfect. And the other thing is, of course, no pollution. No, you're not decreasing the, I think it's the air quality index, or it might
Yeah,
be
it is. Yeah.
yeah. It's one of those things where, and suddenly it's a nice place. There is no more smog. China is taking up all a huge number of electric cars in an attempt to decrease the amount of smogginess. Not quite sure if that should be the word,
Yeah.
but it's to decrease the amount of smog in their major hubs. So therefore it raises the quality, or I say quality of life, raises the air quality, which of course improves quality of life of the people in those cities. So, it's all these other things that electric cars not necessarily enable, but they give and present the idea that all these things are possible. We can change the way attitudes, but not change our livelihoods, if that makes sense. As in, we won't be getting rid of the car. It would just be the fuel source. Change, and it's suddenly changing minor things that way.
Okay, so let's go down my reasons for and problems for a car. Firstly, it's price. Okay, we've thought about that one. My next one was range, and you can get cars with bigger ranges or smaller ranges, and that depends on what batteries you do.
Yeah, and that's funny enough, unfortunately, the price.
Yep. You've also got charging points, which are increasing.
Yes.
And there are more and more of those going along. I've got a vast choice of cars. Virtually every motor manufacturer now is producing electric cars. I think if you want a Rolls Royce, you'll be able to. You can't buy one now. You will be able to buy an electric Rolls Royce. All types of cars are sort of going to electric, so that's all quite good. So there's another problem I still have, though.
What's that?
The chip shortage.
Yes, and it's unfortunate. It's one of those things where electric cars require, I say, electrical management. Basically, you don't have a battery. You actually have a battery with a voltage regulator on it. That's make sure that the electricity from the battery is nice and clean. I say clean. It's nice for the electric motors to run off instead of being all janky. It's like having a out of phase, or in what we say, a TV that's at 60 versus a grid at 50, and it just causes all sorts of interference. Anyway, these tiny little chips, they don't do much. All they do is regulate the flow of electricity from the battery to the, whatever. We're talking glancing over whatever. And, we need more of them. great. It's unfortunate that so does everything else that uses batteries require these. So you can sort of see the scale up of the battery production hasn't quite met the scale up of these that the requires of these chips, and it takes a long time. I say a long time to make these chips, but every battery requires these chips, and the sudden splurge, I say, of all these new vehicle registrations of electric cars has put sudden demand on these chip manufacturers who weren't expected to make these number of chips. Now, it's not a massive problem because you just say, well, they just need to scale up with electric cars. Except it's not the car manufacturers making them; they just get supplied these things. So there's no, in the supply chain, there's no recompense. There's no sudden investment,
Yeah.
or build up. So it is going to take time, but it will sort itself out. But just give it a moment.
Now, I was surprised about one of the other reasons that people don't want to buy electric cars, and they said it's the fire risk. And that surprised me somewhat because basically most cars use petrol or diesel, and that is sort of quite a fire risk. Except, of course, people are been driving those cars around for years, and unlike watching sort of American movies where the car has a crash, even a slight bump, and it seems to burst into flames, that doesn't happen in reality. It only happens in Hollywood. And so battery fires do seem to cause a lot of media attention, but it's no evidence at all that there's any greater risk with a electric car. The only excitement you would want if you want to drive it into a river or something, but then thank goodness the batteries are sealed. If the car's going to break up when it goes in there and the battery rips, then yes, you might get a lithium fire.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like the classic thing of sort of, remember when cars could only travel 30 miles an hour because they didn't any faster than 30 miles per hour, people couldn't breathe, or
I will correct you. That was actually trains that they said that of, and cars, the speed limit was more or less 4 miles an hour because you had to walk in front with a red flag in case you sort of startled horses or other things.
yeah. Anyway, but it's that classical thing. Electric cars are new. Yes, when they go wrong and they catch fire, they catch fire beautifully, and it's a majestic sort of flame that causes from this because it's a lithium fire. Now, most people don't know how to deal with a lithium fire. Funny enough, it's the same way you deal with a petrol fire, which is essentially you need just to cover it. But that's a different, it's
Yeah. I know a little bit about lithium fires in that we do here. Because I teach, and we will look at things like alkali metals, and you have to look at the problems with something like lithium. And one of the things I show the students when I'm teaching is that you take a little bit of lithium and maybe it's on fire, but even if it's not, I just pour a little bit of water over it and immediately it bursts into flames. So it isn't the sort of thing that you're going to throw water at to try and make this better. On the contrary, because it's a chemical reaction, throwing water at lithium is actually what's causing the fire. So fire is caused by three things: fuel, oxygen, and heat. And you've got to take one of those away.
Yeah, but I then go back to that statement, a sort of a petrol fire. If you pour water on a petrol fire,
It's exciting.
it's exciting and doesn't do anything. Exactly, because of course, and so, all these people say, all the tragedy of the thing is the same as the petrol, because, it's just one of those things. But I think it's more the fact that electric cars are new and people sort of don't aware about them. But it's really just people just making some stuff up because, of course, you treat the lithium fire, the battery, the same as a petrol fire, and everything's handy dandy. It's people making stuff up. Oh, these batteries. They can, because obviously when in a crash, because the batteries are part of the car, it sort of could crash, and but at the same time the fuel tank's also a part of the tank. It's these arguments they've just made up because they don't want people to go to electric, because they're probably backed by a fossil fuel company. That's one of the major things you find is that I wouldn't say the fossil fuel industry, but the petrol companies are not liking the change everybody's going over to electric. They're suddenly trying to find ways to get you to sell the power. You'll find that they're actually transitioning into the power industry. Admittedly, it's where suddenly they can then sell you the power for your car. And, they put up the electric charging posts, is so basically you continue to pay them money as opposed to them going with the dinosaurs.
Okay, so let's ask a different question then. I want a new car. Do I buy a hybrid? Do I buy a plug-in hybrid? Or do I buy an electric car? These are three choices that most people are now going to have to make over the next sort of few years.
Yeah, so let's quickly go through the list. So a hybrid is basically electric. You've got an electric generator that is powered by a engine, a gas engine, or gasoline engine. So that turns it, that powers the battery stuff. So you need all the fuel tank of those things, but your car wheels are still powered by a motor. Okay, the plug-in hybrid is very similar to those, except the batteries are generally bigger. I say bigger, but you can plug in mains to those batteries, so you don't need to actually fill it with fuel to drive it away, if that makes any sense.
So they're becoming more popular, aren't they?
Yeah. And then, of course, you've got the standard electric vehicles, which are just plug in and play, and plug in and drive, shall we say.
Yeah, plug in and go. So let's look at some of the positives and whatever. If I've got a hybrid car, that's great. I'm still using some petrol, but I'm not using petrol all the time. So I've got a terrific improvement on my fuel economy. I get a slight benefit on my tax. If I want to tow something like a caravan, these work really well trying to do that. But they're going to cost more than a petrol car. They're probably going to cost actually less, though, than an electric car. And the range here is pretty good. But basically, some of those are going to start to disappear. The sale of those new hybrid cars is going to end in 2035. So I've then got to think, well, yeah, the plug-in hybrid might be better.
That's the next stage along, but of course, so they're going to be full laster. They're going to be on sale longer, and you can be able to buy them better. And that is probably where the likelihood we're looking towards going for, I say, longer term vehicles. We're talking, converting lorries into these plug-in hybrids where they can be plug-in, but they've still got a fuel tank and are still to power basically the motors, the things.
Yeah, so a plug-in hybrid, we're talking about almost a car with two engines, aren't we?
Well, yes.
So you've got an electric car that it's about, as far as I know, a plug-in hybrid. It normally starts up on electric. If you're only going to just pootle into town and back, possibly it's only going to use electric. But if you're going to go on a longer trip, then that's where the engine comes in, the sort of petrol engine, and it does that. Yeah, and it's got lower running costs, of course. The con, of course, for that is they are sort of still more expensive than a normal petrol car. And I think there's also got to be quite a bit about changing your driving habits.
Well, yes. There's a whole issue around basically you need to be more eco-friendly with your driving, but that's something that needs to be done anyway with a normal car to preserve its fuel. I say your fuel economy. At the rate we're going with the fuel price, you need to make all that petrol last. Instead of over braking and sort of just brake gently, so you're not using fuel. It's those friendly eco things that are driving that needs to be implemented, which aren't being done. And you just, as I said, you take those skills from your petrol diesel car and drive it into the electric hybrid or just the pure electric vehicles. As I said, the car isn't leaving the streets. It's just what's going in the tank that's changing.
You've been listening to the Going Green podcast. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back next week with another Going Green expose item.
Yes,
whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever. Until then, it's goodbye from me and
a goodbye from me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.